For over 30 years, Johnny Carson ruled late night. But behind the charm, the wit, and the perfect timing was a man who rarely let anyone in. He interviewed thousands of guests, but only a select few ever truly mattered to him. They weren't always the flashiest names or the loudest personalities, but they made him laugh when no one else could, made him feel something real, and reminded him why he chose this life in the first place. Tonight we're opening that door. This is the story of the 9 Golden Age guests Johnny Carson loved the most, the ones who left a mark no spotlight could explain. Some brought chaos, some brought calm, but every one of them gave Johnny something he never faked: genuine joy. Let's reveal the 9 stars who earned his respect, cracked his shell, and made television history in the process. Number 9. Betty White. The one who matched him beat for beat. When Betty White walked onto Johnny Carson's stage, she didn't command the room, she invited it in. One smile, and the audience leaned forward like they were about to be let in on a secret. And Johnny? He snapped to attention. Because Betty wasn't just funny, she was sharp. Quicker than most, smarter than she let on, and always in control. Johnny would toss a sly setup, half a thought, barely a sentence, and Betty would flip it, fire it back, and land a punchline so clean it stunned the room. She didn't overpower him. She didn't compete. She matched him, line for line, word for word, wit for wit. That kind of chemistry? It's rare, almost impossible on live television. But Betty made it look effortless. Her humor had bite, but it never drew blood. She could tease Johnny's ego, poke fun at Hollywood's boys' club, or twist a harmless anecdote into a knockout joke, and somehow leave everyone smiling. But what truly sealed her place in Johnny's heart wasn't just the timing, it was the kindness. Betty didn't sprint off stage after the cameras cut. She lingered. She thanked the camera operators for the close-ups, chatted with the stagehands like they were old friends, remembered names, remembered pets. One time, a sound tech mentioned his dog was sick. The next time Betty came on the show, she asked how the dog was doing by name. That wasn't part of the act. It was who she was. And Johnny noticed it all. Because Carson measured people not just by how well they performed, but by how they treated the people who didn't get applause. With Betty, Johnny felt safe to take risks. He could push the edge of a joke, knowing she'd catch him. She wasn't just a guest. She was a mirror reflecting back his best side. And when she left the stage, Johnny didn't just smile. He exhaled. Because with Betty White, The Tonight Show wasn't just funny. It felt human. Number 8. Sammy Davis Jr. When Sammy Davis Jr. entered The Tonight Show, it didn't feel like a guest walking in. It felt like electricity hitting the building. Johnny's face would light up before Sammy even reached the chair. The band would be grinning. The crew would buzz. Because they all knew when Sammy was in the building, the show was about to take off. He didn't sit, he performed. Even in the pauses between questions, he was drumming his fingers, tapping his foot, or mimicking Sinatra with such precision, the audience would howl before he even reached the punchline. He was a one-man variety show, but somehow never overwhelming. That's what made him magic. He could switch from a dead-on Bogart impression to a joke about his height to a tap routine on the studio floor, all within 90 seconds, and still manage to bring it back to Johnny for the next question. And Johnny? He didn't even try to keep up. He just sat back, grinning like a kid at a magic show. But beneath the energy and spectacle, Sammy carried something deeper: respect. He didn't come to dominate, he came to elevate. The crew, the band, the interns, even Johnny himself. Backstage, he'd high-five the stagehands, teach a spotlight operator how to moonwalk, balance a pencil on his nose just to get a smile out of a stressed-out producer. He was joy with legs. And Carson respected that more than most people knew. Because while some guests used the show as a mirror to reflect themselves, Sammy turned it into a celebration. He didn't take the spotlight, he shared it. And Johnny never forgot how that made the entire room feel. In one memorable appearance, Sammy broke into an impromptu impression battle with Johnny. It was spontaneous, unscripted, and electric. By the end of it, both men were in tears from laughing, and so was the audience. Later, Johnny would call it one of the best segments of his career. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Sammy didn't chase the laugh. He brought the soul. And Carson, for all his polished timing and calm demeanor, needed that kind of chaos in his world. When Sammy left the stage, the air still buzzed. The show didn't just roll on, it glowed. Because with Sammy Davis Jr., Johnny didn't just get a great interview. He got a moment he could never recreate. And that kind of magic? It's the reason The Tonight Show mattered. Number 7. George Burns. George Burns didn't chase laughs. He invited them in, like an old friend stepping into your living room with a cigar, a grin, and a secret only he could tell. When he walked onto Johnny Carson's stage, the energy didn't spike. It settled. There was no rush, no need for noise. Because with George, the joke was never forced. It was placed carefully, elegantly, like fine silverware before a holiday meal. Johnny loved that. Burns had what so few comics ever mastered: composure. He didn't punch the joke, he glided into it. A tilt of the head, a slow puff of the cigar. And then boom, the line landed, and the room erupted. Carson didn't try to compete. He watched, because Burns made comedy feel civilized. Their conversations felt like a waltz. Johnny would toss a soft lead, something about vaudeville or radio, and George would glide through memory with ease. No ego, no filler, just clean storytelling, perfectly timed. And backstage, Burns was exactly who you hoped he'd be. He arrived early, shook hands with the security guard at the door, tapped the prop guy on the shoulder with a one-liner he hadn't used on stage in 30 years, waved at the band leader like an old pal, and meant it all. To Johnny, that was gold. He believed the way someone treated the crew said everything about their character. And Burns? Burns treated them like co-stars. One time, Johnny asked George why he still did it, why he still toured, still showed up, still worked rooms long after most comics had retired. Burns smiled and said, "Because I still like making people feel good, and because nobody's kicked me off the stage yet." That stuck with Johnny. Because for all of Carson's sophistication, all his structure and polish, he loved people who stayed real. And George Burns was as real as it got. He didn't try to be loud. He didn't try to be relevant. He was simply timeless. When he left the set, Johnny would sit a little straighter, cards in hand, smile on his face. And the crew, they always looked a little lighter. Because George didn't just deliver punchlines. He delivered dignity. And in an industry that often forgets what that means, Johnny never stopped appreciating it. Number 6. Jimmy Stewart. When Jimmy Stewart walked onto the Tonight Show stage, you didn't hear thunderous applause. You felt something quieter, a kind of reverence. Johnny Carson didn't stand up, but he always straightened in his chair. Because Stewart wasn't there to perform. He was there to share. He didn't launch into monologues or chase laughs. He told stories, slow, gentle, sometimes wandering, always honest. He'd start with a hesitant "well," and the room would go still. Carson, who spent every night volleying jokes and dodging awkward silences, would simply fall silent. Because with Jimmy, you didn't fill the air. You listened. One of those moments became legendary. It wasn't scripted. It wasn't hyped. Jimmy sat on the couch and began to read a poem. It was about his dog, Bo. A simple tribute. Soft, personal. And as the words unfolded, the room shifted. The band lowered their heads. The cameras pulled tighter. And Johnny Carson, so famously composed, broke. His eyes welled. His voice caught. He looked away, but it was too late. In that moment, millions of Americans saw something they'd never seen before. Johnny Carson feeling, without a punchline to cover it up. Afterward, Johnny told his staff it was one of the most meaningful moments in the show's entire run. Because it wasn't performance. It was truth. Backstage, Stewart was no different. He shook hands with the crew, asked how their kids were doing, offered quiet compliments, treated everyone, not just Johnny, as if they were the star. He carried himself with humility that didn't feel staged. It felt earned. Johnny admired many performers, but he respected Jimmy Stewart. Not because of the Oscars, not because of the box office records, but because Stewart reminded him of something rare in Hollywood: decency. Stewart never needed to outshine anyone. He didn't have to try to be on. He just showed up as himself and trusted that was enough. And for Carson, that wasn't just refreshing. It was grounding. Jimmy made The Tonight Show feel less like a machine and more like a conversation around a kitchen table. And every time he left, Johnny wasn't rushing to the next cue card. He was thinking, reflecting, because Jimmy Stewart didn't bring a segment. He brought a memory. Number 5. Dean Martin. Dean Martin didn't walk onto The Tonight Show set. He floated in, tie undone, glass in hand, eyes twinkling with trouble. He didn't perform. He wandered. And from the first second, Johnny relaxed. Because with Dean, you could throw the run sheet out the window. There was no script, no order, no plan, and Johnny loved it. Martin would slump into the guest chair like he'd just stumbled out of a Vegas lounge. Interrupt Johnny halfway through a sentence to sing a Sinatra lyric. Crack a joke about Ed McMahon's laugh, then forget what he was talking about. But somehow, it worked. Dean wasn't polished like Jack Benny. He wasn't precise like Bob Hope. He was something else entirely, effortlessly magnetic. The audience never knew where he was going next, and neither did Johnny. But they trusted the ride. Because Dean could stumble through a punchline and still get a bigger laugh than someone who rehearsed it 20 times. Not despite the mess, because of it. And that's what Carson admired most. Dean Martin didn't need perfection. He made imperfection feel like art. He reminded Johnny that television wasn't supposed to be tight wires and ticking clocks. It could be loose, wild, fun. And that looseness was contagious. You could see Johnny loosen his tie literally and figuratively every time Dean was on the couch. He'd lean back, laugh more, ask fewer questions. Because when Dean was around, the show wasn't about format. It was about feel. And Dean knew how to make people feel good. Backstage, he was no different. He'd toast the lighting guy with an imaginary martini, slip the drummer a wink, pretend to trip on a cable, and then laugh like he was the audience. He didn't put on airs. He disarmed the room, and Johnny noticed every bit of it. Because in a job where everyone was trying to impress you, Dean Martin just showed up and had a good time. And that made everyone else want to have a good time too. One night, Dean flubbed a joke so badly the audience groaned. He paused, smirked, looked at Johnny and said, "I didn't come here to be funny. I came here to sit down." The audience erupted. And Johnny? He laughed until tears streamed down his face. Because Dean didn't chase approval. He floated above it. He wasn't a guest. He was a reminder that sometimes the best moments come when you stop trying to be perfect and just be present. With Dean Martin, The Tonight Show didn't feel like a television production. It felt like two old friends swapping stories in a bar with a few million people listening in. Number 4. Ella Fitzgerald. When Ella Fitzgerald stepped onto Johnny Carson's stage, the temperature dropped. Not from nerves, from awe. The band straightened up. The crew went quiet. And Johnny, who usually cracked a joke before the guest even sat down, simply smiled and waited. Because with Ella, you didn't fill the space. You honored it. She didn't make an entrance. She glided in modest, graceful, barely touching the floor. No grand wave, no exaggerated gestures, just a nod to the band, a soft "Hi, Johnny," and then music. That's when the room stopped breathing. Her voice wasn't flashy. It was pure, round, clear, effortless. The kind of sound that didn't demand your attention, it earned it. And Johnny? He didn't joke. He didn't host. He listened. Because Ella didn't perform to impress. She performed to connect. Each note carried a story. Each pause had intent. Even her scat runs felt like secret languages passed down through generations. And when she sang, the band didn't back her up. They conversed with her. It was jazz in its rawest form, alive, unscripted, and full of trust. Johnny admired precision. But Ella's precision wasn't technical. It was emotional. It was earned. And what touched him even more than the music was the grace behind it. Backstage, she was quiet, humble, and utterly real. She thanked the sound guy for keeping the monitors clean. She told the makeup artist, "You made me look like I slept." She asked the camera operator how their daughter's recital went, and remembered the answer 6 months later. She didn't walk around like a legend. She floated like a person who respected the room. And Johnny? He noticed all of it. Because while most stars let their talent do the talking, Ella let her humanity speak even louder. On the couch, she didn't tell wild stories or deliver punchlines. She spoke softly about the road, the music, the old days, about the pianists who taught her to listen, about the crowds who didn't need smoke and lights to be moved. And Johnny rarely interrupted, because he didn't need to. The music had already said everything. When the applause rolled across the studio and Ella stood to leave, Johnny didn't rush the next segment. He sat in that stillness. That honest, beautiful stillness. Because with Ella Fitzgerald, The Tonight Show wasn't about spectacle. It was about soul. She didn't come to perform. She came to remind everyone, including Johnny, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do on television is tell the truth without saying a word. Number 3. Jack Benny. Jack Benny didn't just walk onto Johnny Carson's stage. He shifted the entire rhythm of the room. No fanfare, no punchy intro. Just a calm, deliberate presence that made the audience sit a little taller and wait. Because Benny didn't need to speak to be funny. He used space like no one else ever had. A glance, a turn of the head, a pause so long it made you start laughing before the joke landed, because somehow the pause was the joke. Johnny, a craftsman of timing himself, was in awe. He didn't just enjoy Benny's performances, he studied them like a student at the feet of a master. Where most comedians filled every second with sound, Jack Benny dared to let the silence stretch. He trusted the audience would come with him. And they always did. On air, Johnny would toss Benny a gentle setup. A question, a nudge, then stillness. And Benny would wait. He'd let the room breathe, let the tension simmer, let the cameras feel like they were holding their breath. Then, with perfect timing, he'd drop a line so simple, so understated, that the crowd would erupt. It wasn't just comedy. It was control. Off camera, that control never left him. He'd ask to lower the guest stool by exactly 1 inch, not for comfort, but for rhythm. He'd trim a single word from a monologue card because it threw off the beat. He didn't need to talk about timing, he lived it. Johnny noticed every detail. Because while other comics chased laughs, Benny built an environment where laughs had no choice but to happen. It wasn't just about jokes. It was about atmosphere. Benny's persona, polite, a little vain, comically stingy, acted like scaffolding. He could hang any punchline on it, and the audience would do half the work. And Johnny? He loved that kind of trust between performer and crowd. He once said in private that every time he let a laugh breathe a little longer in his own monologue, he was tipping his hat to Jack Benny. Because Benny showed him something profound. If you respect the silence, the laughter will come to you. During commercial breaks, Benny wasn't performing for the crew. He wasn't on. He nodded quietly to the stage manager, asked how the family was, smiled at the makeup artist with a soft "Thanks, kid." He conserved energy, held space, so that when the next moment came, it would matter. Johnny wasn't just impressed by that, he was grateful for it. Because in a world where everyone tried to be louder, faster, funnier, Jack Benny proved that timing is power, and that sometimes the greatest laugh doesn't come from what you say, but from the courage to say nothing at all. Number 2. Bob Hope. When Bob Hope sat down across from Johnny Carson, it didn't feel like an interview. It felt like two seasoned generals comparing war stories, except the weapons were punchlines and no one got hurt. Johnny didn't need a list of questions for Bob. He just needed a spark, because once Hope got rolling, he was unreal. One line, then another, then a third. Hidden in the pause, clean, sharp and carved like it had been rehearsed in 100 rooms before it ever touched air. Johnny loved that. Hope didn't ramble, he sniped. And every shot landed with grace. Carson was known for timing. But Bob had tempo. He could build momentum so fast that Johnny sometimes just sat back laughing, knowing there was no way to catch up. Their chemistry wasn't just good. It was surgical. Hope would sit with one leg crossed, lean back casually, and launch into a zinger about golf, a jab at Hollywood, a clean roast of politics. Not edgy, not loud, just steel, delivered with a smile. And what Johnny admired most, it wasn't just the craft, it was the consistency. Hope never showed up lazy, never half-baked a bit. Even when he was older, even when his schedule was stacked, he treated The Tonight Show like it mattered. And Johnny noticed. Backstage, Hope arrived early, not to prepare, but to hang out. He swapped stories with the camera guys, told jokes to the band, cracked up the interns, slipped a one-liner to the stage manager on his way to makeup. He treated the crew like old friends, like they were the show, not just the ones behind it. To Johnny, that kind of old-school respect was everything. Because while many guests came chasing the spotlight, Bob Hope showed up for the game. And when the cameras rolled, Johnny tossed him a softball. "How's the tour, Bob?" Hope would grin, wait a beat, and fire back. "The tour's great. The audience laughs, the plane flies, and the checks bounce." Then he'd tag it, twist it, and spin it into a joke about politicians, then a memory about Bing Crosby, then a self-deprecating jab about his own timing. Johnny didn't even try to interrupt. He just watched, delighted. Because he knew this was comedy at its purest form. And when the segment ended, no big goodbyes. Just a nod, a smirk. Two professionals who knew the plane had landed. Johnny once said Bob Hope was the only man who made him laugh before the camera turned on, and after it turned off. Because Hope wasn't trying to be impressive. He was, and that kind of effortless brilliance, it wasn't learned. It was lived. Number 1. Lucille Ball. She didn't walk through the curtain. She stormed through it. Hair blazing, shoulders back, eyes locked in. And before Johnny could even say hello, the audience was already laughing. Because Lucille Ball didn't wait for the moment. She was the moment. From the second she stepped on stage, the rules changed. Johnny's structure, the one he held like gospel, suddenly felt optional. And for a man who loved control, he loved losing it to Lucy. She didn't just sit in the chair. She turned the whole studio into a playground. During commercial breaks, she'd mock balance on cables, pretend to trip over stagehands, flirt with the cue card guy, or mimic a pratfall so perfectly the boom mic would shake. She was dangerous, unpredictable, alive. And Carson? He never looked more free. With Lucy, there was no roadmap. He'd throw out a question, and she'd hijack the moment, shift into a story, then pivot into a bit that had nothing to do with the setup. And Johnny didn't mind. He relished it. Because Lucy reminded him what made television magical in the first place: joy without permission. The laughs were real, the chaos was sacred. And every time she appeared, Johnny got to be what he rarely allowed himself to be: surprised. But it wasn't just the comedy that earned her the top spot on his private list. It was the care. After taping, she didn't rush out. She stayed. She thanked the lighting crew for making her red hair glow instead of flare. She hugged the makeup artists. She asked the interns what they wanted to be, and told them, "You're funnier than you think." One night, a stagehand's daughter came to visit. She was nervous, hiding behind the camera carts. Lucy spotted her. She walked over, got down on one knee in her heels, and whispered, You know, it takes a lot of nerve to stand in the dark. That's where the best people are. Johnny heard about it the next day, and he never forgot it. Because Lucy didn't just light up the stage, she lit up everyone around it. Their chemistry on screen wasn't scripted. It was jazz. He'd lay down the rhythm. She'd riff. He'd laugh. She'd double down. And when the segment ended, they'd both look like they didn't want it to stop. She broke all the rules, and made it feel like that's how the rules were meant to be played. When the applause rolled in like thunder, Johnny would glance at the audience with that boyish grin, the one that said, This is why I do it." And when she left the set, Carson didn't exhale out of relief. He exhaled because he'd just shared space with something rare, something alive, something that reminded him why the stage had called him in the first place. Lucille Ball didn't just make Johnny Carson laugh. She made him feel unapologetically alive. Johnny Carson never published a list. He never said who he loved most or who meant the most to him. But if you watched closely, if you listened, not just to the jokes, but to the silence between them, the answer was always there. These 9 weren't just famous. They were different. Lucille Ball reminded him that chaos could be beautiful when driven by heart. Bob Hope showed him that clean, smart comedy was a kind of craftsmanship. Jack Benny taught him that silence could land harder than any punchline. Ella Fitzgerald turned performance into poetry, and grace into power. Dean Martin proved that fun didn't need a script. Jimmy Stewart cracked Johnny's armor with sincerity, not speed. George Burns brought elegance to every line and left warmth behind every exit. Sammy Davis Jr. turned energy into inclusion, lighting up the entire room. And Betty White, she matched him in every way and made everyone else feel seen while doing it. Each one gave Johnny something real, something television often forgets to chase. Connection. Not to ratings, or headlines, or applause counts, but to people. These weren't just his favorite guests. They were his reminders. That underneath the lights, the laughter, the pressure, there's a reason you do it all. Not to be the biggest name in the room, but to share it with people who make it feel worth it. So now it's your turn. If you could bring one of these guests back to that chair every week, who would it be? And what's the one clip you'd show someone who never got to see them with Johnny? Drop your pick and your timestamp in the comments. If this trip through late night's golden age hit home, tap like, subscribe for more true Hollywood storytelling, and ring the bell so you never miss what's next. And if you want a part 2, tell us, who else should have made Johnny's private list? We'll dig in.